Welcome to the Race to Near Space. In this podcast, we're bringing you behind the scenes with the technologists, entrepreneurs, and companies behind the next space race, the one happening 20 kilometers above us in Earth's stratosphere. Today, we're fortunate to sit down with Alan Eustace. He is one of the few humans to have physically experienced the stratosphere. In October 2014, Eustace donned a specially designed spacesuit and strapped himself to a balloon filled with 35,000 cubic feet of helium. Over nearly 2 hours, he ascended to just over 135,000 feet above ground. Then he cut himself loose. For 15 minutes, Eustace hurtled towards the ground at over 800 miles per hour, breaking the sound barrier and setting off a sonic boom that could be heard on the ground. His 2014 jump set the world altitude record for skydiving, a record that still stands today. Eustace's jump from the stratosphere has been chronicled in numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, and is the subject of the documentary called 14 Minutes from Earth. In addition to his first-hand knowledge of Earth's stratosphere, Eustace is an accomplished computer scientist who served as a senior vice president of engineering at Google from 2004 to 2015. Alan Eustace, thank you so much for joining us on the Race to Near Space, and welcome.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So you hold the world altitude record for skydiving, but you planned your trip in secret over a number of years, and your motivation seemed less about publicity and more about science. I guess I'll start with a question that you probably get quite often, but why did you do it?
Well, it's a great question. The main reason is I thought I had a better way of doing it. I mean, I'm an engineer at heart, and I had read about every other attempt that had ever been made, and I understood kind of what the strengths and weaknesses of each approach was. And I thought, why build a big capsule? Why do you need the capsule? Why don't you just build a scuba diving equivalent that works in space? And if you have such a thing, which is, spacesuit, oxygen, all that kind of stuff, then you can do anything with it. I mean, you could do a skydive with it. You could, fly in a sailplane with it. You could hang glide with it. There's so many opportunities for using it. If you just figured out the fundamental problem of what is a scuba diving equivalent for space. And, for fun, let's use skydiving as the first test case of this new system. So I just thought I knew a better way to do it. And I thought about it. I wrote on a whiteboard. I had a notebook. I had a Google Doc that, I had studied all the, aspects of it. How much oxygen would I need? What kind of spacesuit would I need? What kind of parachute would I need? What kind of a launch system would I need for the balloons? What size balloon might I need? And at the end, I came to the conclusion that it would work. But of course, it was all in my mind and on a piece of paper. And so the question is, when do I approach somebody who actually knows something about some of these different areas just to get a gut check on whether I was right or wrong? And my intention was just to see if somebody, would verify that, my calculations were correct. And, but I ended up getting introduced to a guy named Tabor McCallum from Paragon Space Development Systems, and a friend of mine arranged a call. I don't think he would have taken my call normally, and I called him up and I walked him through, what I had proposed and why. He goes, not only do I think it would work, but I would love to be a part of it. And so at that point, rather than putting the thing in a drawer and declaring success, we embarked on a 3-year project to prove that you could build a scuba diving equivalent for the stratosphere. And we tested it using a pretty demanding application, which is skydiving from, the highest point that anyone had ever skydived before. But you're right. It was a science project. It was not to get publicity. It was to understand the limits of certain elements of technology that would make this possible or not possible.
You mentioned there some of the team that you had behind you, but certainly engineers, technologists, experts in, I imagine, spacesuit design, balloons, parachutes. You've said that some of the designs were driven by technical surprises you learned along the way. Could you maybe touch on some of those and how you overcame them?
Yeah, no, there's tons of places along the way where, you think something's going to be easy and something turns out to be difficult, or the other way around. One example is getting the balloon down. like after I leave, how do you get this balloon out of, out of, not orbit, but it's, it's at 135,000 feet, and it's about the size of a large, sports arena. And you got to get it back down. And so the FAA requires that you have, two different ways to get it down. And they're redundant. But it turns out that we found out early in the project that, two ways aren't enough. We had a balloon that was wandering around, the national airspace, and we couldn't figure out the two ways that we had to get it down. Neither of them worked. And so we ended up having a big program to try to figure out how we can reliably get one of these balloons down. And, I won't spoil any secrets, but one of the key elements was to use pyrotechnics, which is basically to be able to create a large hole in the top of the balloon. And if you use too much pyrotechnics, we were worried it would be a flaming balloon coming down to the to Earth. But it actually didn't even take one set of pyrotechnics; it took two. But yeah, who would have thought that one of the hardest parts of the project was getting a balloon down from 135,000 feet? But it turned out that turned out to be a fairly difficult problem.
Yeah, and I can imagine pyrotechnics on a balloon that's carrying you to 135,000 feet is probably somewhat of a interesting proposition, being the one on the bottom of the balloon.
Well, we also had a failure on the ground before one of the attempts, which fired the pyrotechnics on the ground. So yeah, it was definitely a place where you had to be careful and kind of understand how the systems worked and be careful about fail safes. But yeah, it was a problem that I don't think any of us would have identified as something that was difficult at the beginning, but it turned out it took a lot of good engineering to get it to work in the end.
I think a lot of people think of the stratosphere as a very cold, dark place, but I was actually interested to read that one of the challenges your team faced was that it actually becomes hotter as you get to the upper ends of the stratosphere because there's no atmosphere to remove the heat. What sort of challenges did this pose for you? I imagine, having to have some sort of temperature control to keep your suit from fogging up and keep your body warm.
Well, it was interesting. We used ILC Dover was the spacesuit provider, and they designed an architecture specific for me because no suit that they had ever built had been warmed. Everything else had been cooled. They built the extra vehicle activity suits for the space shuttle walk, spacewalks and stuff like that. And you have the moon suits were done by them, so. They have a lot of experience cooling suits, but not any experience heating suits. And we thought it was going to be very cold. And it does get very cold in the stratosphere. It's, minus 100 degrees or more. And so we thought warming it was going to be a big problem. And so we did some ground tests where we actually took me and the suit down to incredibly low temperatures. But that was one place where we really over-designed things because even though it's very cold in the stratosphere, there's so few molecules that it doesn't conduct the heat away from you. And so even the smallest amount of heat that you have is sufficient for you to survive up there, even though the atmosphere around you is extremely cold. Think about it as the molecules are moving very slowly, up there, but there's so few of them that they don't interact with each other. And so in the actual record skydive, I had the heaters on when I was on the ground because it was still pretty cold in Roswell in October. And then I had them on when we were going through the lower levels of the atmosphere. But about 70,000 feet, I turned the heaters off and didn't need them all for the whole rest of the ascent and the descent. It's kind of interesting to us that there was kind of a thermal equilibrium in the stratosphere, which, again, we did not expect.
One other thing that I read you discovered on your journey was that you actually had to flip the script a bit on normal parachuting. So in order to move left, you had to move your body right and vice versa. And I think I have that correct, but maybe explain to me just why that was and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, the very first skydive that we did out of an airplane had a lot of issues. It was the first time we had ever been away from a suit technician, and we had skydivers, safety divers that were skydiving with me to be able to help out in the event of any problems. And we did have problems, and they did help out. But on the way down, one of the issues that we had was I was starting to spin and I couldn't stop it. I did the things that I expected to do from my skydiving career, and they didn't work. And it was very confusing to us about why. We reviewed the video and all this kind of stuff, and still couldn't figure it out. And we eventually, when I go to pull the parachute, I go into a configuration that skydivers are very familiar with, where you take your right hand and you put it down and to the right. And you take your left hand and you move it up and above your head to the left. So the right hand goes down, left hand goes up. And lo and behold, one of the safety divers looked at the footage of that and said, "Alan, when you did that, you stopped the turn." And we all looked at the video and it's like, no, that's the wrong thing. That should make me turn the other direction, and it didn't. And so the next jump, we actually tried to, on purpose, put myself in those positions. And we realized that we could stop the spin by doing exactly the opposite of what a normal skydive might do. There's actually two different ways that we could do it. But yeah, there was a seminal moment when we figured out that the normal skydiving actions create exactly the wrong thing and actually exacerbate the spin if I tried to stop it in the normal way. So yeah, it was a great moment, and I want to thank my safety divers who took the footage and noticed that particular effect.
And probably quite a personal relief to be able to control yourself on the way down, I imagine.
Oh yeah, it was a huge moment actually on the next skydive, because you just have no idea what's going on, and we didn't know it would work. We just had one little bit of footage, maybe 2 seconds that showed a particular effect. But then we went up on the next skydive and we tried it out, and lo and behold, it worked. Matter of fact, there was 2 different ways to work. In the end, what you do essentially is you're pointing in the direction that you want to go, which is exactly opposite normal skydive. But if I want to turn, left, I actually take my left arm and point it in the direction I want to go. And if you're a skydiver, you realize, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. But anyway, there was little, mental mnemonics that, helped me, in the actual skydive to be able to override, 700 jumps of experience that said do it the other way.
I want to take you back to October 2014. I think you arrived at an abandoned airstrip in Roswell, New Mexico. I'm just curious, how were you feeling that day? Were there any last minute regrets or worries?
Well, it wasn't abandoned, actually. The airstrip is, alive and well in Roswell, New Mexico. It used to be a strategic air command base. It actually has one of the longest runways, in the United States, like 14,000 feet or something like that. But yeah, it has multiple runways, and we took several of them. And they shut down the operations for us to be able to do the launch that morning. But anyway, it's an active air base. But anyway, what was your question about that morning?
Yeah, I was curious how you were feeling.
I felt good, actually. You remember that the way the progression actually worked was we did the skydives from airplanes, and we did one very early in the program, found a lot of problems, and we fixed those problems. So it was a year later, after that first jump out of that airplane, that we had dialed in, controlling, turns and things like that. We had dialed in the landing system. We had dialed in all the communications, and so took us a while to get to that. And then we did 5 airplane jumps, where everything worked. On the last one, everything worked perfectly. And I was able to control my turns, and I was able to open my parachute, and I was able to control it. I was able to land, where I expected to be able to land, and so it worked really well. We were very excited about that. But that's just the beginning of the next set of tests. So the next set of tests was to do it under a balloon, because that's the complete system. Going out of an airplane isn't. And so the very first test was a test with a very small balloon, actually, to 55,000 feet. And that was the test that made me the most nervous, because we were testing many systems that we had only tested unmanned. So we had already taken a dummy up to an altitude and released them and things like that. We had tested the drogue system on dummies and things like that, but we hadn't tested the complete system. And so I think that was the one that made me the most nervous, and it was the one that went to 55,000 feet. But it worked fine. Actually worked flawlessly. And so after we did that, then we went to 105,000 feet. And each of these tested kind of a different regime. The first one, the skydive itself, wasn't very long, and we weren't going that fast, and there was very little time in between where you could not open a parachute. I mean, when you're going slow, you have a chance of opening a parachute. When you're going fast, you can't open the parachute. And then when you slow down, when the air gets thicker, you can open the parachute. So, the very first test only had probably, 30 seconds where you were not able to open a parachute just because of speed. The next one from 105 had, we were going a lot faster. We had a much bigger zone where we couldn't open the parachute, until we got below it. And then, the high altitude test, there was obviously there you're going super fast, Mach 1.22, 822 miles an hour. And so that's the first test that we actually went faster than the speed of sound. So in that, October, when we were running, the final jump, I was very confident. We had already tested these systems from 2 different balloon jumps. We knew exactly how, the system would react. We knew exactly, that our predictions on where I was going to land, what the path we were going to take was, the ground teams and the air teams, the helicopters and chase helicopters and doctors. And I mean, we've really had it down. I mean, a guy named Dave Jordan ran the operations side, and he's an amazing guy, and that was an amazing team. And so, believe it or not, on the last one, it was the first chance that I had actually just to relax and enjoy the views. Because, I had all the safety procedures down. I knew exactly what would happen. If this happened, you're going to do this. If this is happening, you do this. So I don't know. And I also, was the case where, I had to, conserve oxygen. So it was very important actually just to relax. And I didn't quite fall asleep on the way up, but it was close to that. I was incredibly relaxed on the way up and enjoying something that I felt like, I would never get a chance to do. And I treasured every moment of that trip up to altitude.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that. I mean, so, you were carried through the layers of Earth's atmosphere. I think the balloon was filled with 35,000 cubic feet of helium. You were traveling around 1,600 feet a minute. And it took you around 2 hours. I guess I'm curious about the view. What did it look like? What did you see as you ascended through the different layers of Earth's atmosphere?
Well, the first thing, it was filled with 35,000 cubic feet of helium. That's correct. But the balloon, when you expands as it goes up, and so that 35,000 or whatever cubic feet of helium actually turned into 11 million, cubic feet of balloon by the time I got up to altitude. So it was gigantic. And, but yeah, it was an interesting thing. I had learned in previous jumps that there were a few things that I did not know about. Like, one of them is as the balloon expands, as it goes up, there's some rip places in the polyethylene that are there on purpose. Basically, it holds things together, and then as the pressure inside the balloon gets big enough, it actually rips a little bit of the balloon material purposefully, and allows the balloon to expand a little more. And it does this, but no one told me at the time that ripping would actually cause me to drop. like all of a sudden I'm, slowly moving up, and then all of a sudden there's this drop, and a little bit of a sound, but not that much of a sound. But anyway, it was a little bit disconcerting the first time I felt it. But I looked up, saw the balloon looked fine, everything. I continued to ascend and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, it was a little disconcerting. But in the final jump, I knew exactly what to expect. So it was not so bad. But anyway, I kind of think about it as the trip up is kind of Google Earth in reverse, right? I'm on the ground. I can see pebbles. I'm literally in this little trolley, sitting, a foot from the ground. And then when I release, I'm shot across basically the balloon is swinging me back underneath of it. So I'm shooting across the ground. And we have carefully calculated I'm not going to hit the ground, but it sure seems like I'm going to hit the ground as I swing under the balloon. And then I start going up, and it's hard to describe. It's this beautiful, quiet ascent. It is continuous. You don't slow down as you go up. You go exactly the same speed the entire time, roughly 1,200 feet per minute, and you just feel like total quiet. The only thing you can hear is the regulator of you breathing in and out. That's the only thing you can hear, and the atmosphere. As you start by seeing pebbles, and then you see people and cars and buildings, and then you just keep going up, and the atmosphere is getting, kind of thinner and thinner. And pretty soon you're seeing cities and counties and states. And, on the last jump, I was trying to see how far I could see. What's the farthest that I could see? Could I see the Gulf of Mexico? The answer is no. I couldn't see the Gulf of Mexico. And I did the math. There's no way to see the Gulf of Mexico. Just the curvature of the earth makes that impossible. But anyway, and then you start going through, you see lacy clouds and things like that. And then you start to see the earth darken. The atmosphere darken, and it's kind of a surprise how quickly it darkens. But even in the places well above, like 70, 80,000 feet, you can still see lacy, icy layers that I never knew were there. And then you get higher and higher, and pretty soon the atmosphere is actually below you. You see the atmosphere, the blue ball, which is Earth. It's below you, and you see this inky darkness of space, which is shocking, and it's funny because you don't see stars, which I expected to see stars, but the Earth is so bright, the reflections is so bright that you can't see the stars. I've talked to my friends that are astronauts, and they say, if you look down, you can't see it. You have to look in the other direction of Earth and block out all the light that the Earth provides before you can start seeing stars. So anyway, and then when you get up there, it is, it's unbelievably beautiful. Words can't describe what it's like to, look down on the Earth and see the curvature of the Earth. And I don't know, it was pleasant and peaceful. There were some people that say you get detached from the Earth and you don't want to come back down. I don't know, maybe that happens for some people, but for me, I definitely wanted to come back down. And so, we stayed up there for a small amount of time, but we're traveling at this point. The stratospheric winds are driving me eastward at, probably about 110, 120 miles an hour. And we're in an area where there's nothing to hit, but, you don't want to spend an enormous amount of time, going, that fast across, Texas. We started in Arizona. We were heading toward Texas. And, so I didn't spend an enormous amount of time up there before, we did the countdown, released, and, came back to Earth.
Coming back to Earth, I read the descent took about 15 minutes, which feels short based on the height that you were releasing from, but it's actually quite a long time. I imagine it was thrilling the entire way down, but talk to me about going that speed and just what it felt like to fall through the atmosphere at that rate of speed.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, we associate speed with, noise and wind and things like that. And because that's what we think of when we think of speed. because it's, all this speed is in the atmosphere. But it's exactly the opposite up there, is that speed is related to a lack of atmosphere. So when I release, I'm in 0G, right? I'm falling in exactly the same speed that gravity is pulling me. And I'm accelerating, and with no resistance, I'm accelerating very fast, So as a result, with nothing to slow me down, 9.8 meters per second squared, it actually increases your speed incredibly fast. And so at about 50 seconds, I'm at the maximum speed that I get to. And then I start encountering enough atmosphere to matter. And so what that appears to me is I start hearing sound for the very first time. Before that, there's no sound. But at 50 seconds, I start to hear sound. And I went back and looked at the GoPro footage and the tapes with the sound, and I correlated that to the graph of my speed. And what's interesting is the moment I hear sound, I'm slowing down. And I continue to slow down for the entire way down until I get to 10,000 feet above the ground, which was the altitude that we decided to open the parachute. It's an amazing feeling. So the first 50 seconds are silent, even though I'm going, 822 miles an hour, Mach 1.22. I'm generating actually sonic booms as I go that were heard on the ground. But
and I read you didn't hear those or to feel them, right?
Yeah. No, there's no indication of a sonic boom for me at all, which I think was interesting. And I listened to tapes. There's no sonic boom. I've talked to people that I know from the Air Force and other things that have gone through Mach 1. Same thing when you're in the cockpit of a jet fighter or something like that. The only indication you have that you're going past Mach 1 is a needle on a gauge.
So you land back on the ground. I think I read you were about 70 miles from where you started. Were there people waiting for you, or did you have a moment to reflect?
Well, the way it works is that we have a prediction on where I'm going to land based on the winds. And that prediction is updated even before I take off. We have Don Day was a meteorologist, and he basically releases a balloon, and that balloon tells me what the wind is in every layer. So the day before, based on the predictions, we actually fly the entire route and make sure that there's no hazards and that we know where the hazards are, and we know if I was to abort, here are the places I want to avoid. Luckily, over Roswell, New Mexico to the east, there's almost no area that is landable terrain. There are almost no trees, almost no lakes, almost no cliffs. I mean, it's a beautiful terrain to land on. So we had already done that. We'd already done the pre-work there. So we had a prediction of exactly where we were going to go, and it was updated, 2 hours before I actually launched. But what happened was we landed almost exactly where we predicted I was going to land, like within a mile. So actually, all the trucks were there, all the helicopters were there within seconds, and we did something which I think, gives me kind of goose pimples. And behind was the guy who worked closely with me on the parachute stuff is a guy named Daniel Blignot, who we call Blickies, and Blickies was in an airplane that was basically circling the corridor where I was going to be coming down. And so the moment I open 10,000 feet above the ground, he directs the airplane basically to come over me, and then he jumps out and opens his parachute right next to me. And then he's my wingman on the way down. He's telling me about obstacles and wind and all kinds of stuff. He lands before me, just to make sure that so that he can be there when I land. So he landed right before me. I landed, and I don't know, 12 seconds later, Blickies is by my side giving me a high five. And so, we also had trucks there with smoke grenades that would tell me what the wind was like. Although I'm not sure that direction was correct. The smoke kind of hugged the ground, and I was feeling that the wind was actually going in the opposite direction, because both Blickies and I, neither of us had very good landings on the final minutes there. Anyway, it was well choreographed. Everybody knew exactly where I was going to be. Everybody was where they were supposed to be. And, literally the helicopters were the slowest thing to get there, because they had to wait for me to land and then, land farther away from me. And then, the doctors, flight surgeons and things jumped out, suit technicians jumped out. They all ran toward me. So they were probably the slowest, but my friend Blickies was there right away.
I guess my last question, there's always been some activity in the stratosphere. You did your jump in 2014. It certainly does seem like in the years, I guess the almost decade since, there's been an increase in activity in the stratosphere. Your former employer, Google, worked on stratosphere connectivity with Project Loon. They're actively flying aircraft in the stratosphere, testing equipment, working on connectivity solutions. I guess, what do you find most interesting about this era of exploration specific to the stratosphere?
Well, it's kind of interesting to me that the stratosphere was so poorly understood and explored. I mean, if you look at the Apollo programs and all the rocket programs, they blasted through the stratosphere in just a very small amount of time. And the same thing on the descent. And nobody lingered in the stratosphere. It wasn't until, these, do-it-yourself science projects where, they had these latex balloons and people would attach GoPros to them and they would go up to the stratosphere and take pictures. I think that people actually, built the technical system to actually spend any time in the stratosphere. And it's an extremely interesting place. I mean, things like the ozone layer and all that kind of stuff are in the stratosphere. I mean, the weather, most of the weather systems are in the troposphere, and they go up to the tropopause, and then the stratosphere is above that. But weather systems itself extend pretty high, and the stratosphere is actually responsible for a lot of weather. But it was kind of ignored in the weather predictions. It still is somewhat ignored in the weather predictions. And there's obviously a lot of experiments that you can do when you're above the Earth's atmosphere, because you do not have the effect of the atmosphere is basically to take away radio waves and other kinds of stuff. There's less things that can go through the atmosphere. So when you get above it, you get an entirely different view, of science. And so yeah, I'm really excited about all the research that's going on right now in the stratosphere. And, I think there's a good chance that we'll come up with transportation schemes that use the stratosphere. I think they've already found life in the stratosphere, that there's actually organisms that can survive and thrive in the stratosphere. So yeah, it's a wonderful time for stratospheric exploration. And then, there's also space tourism. My friends Jane and Tabor are, right now at a company called Space Perspectives, and they're trying to do balloon-based space tourism. So you could take, 8 people up to the stratosphere in the comfort of a beautiful first-class environment, not in a spacesuit like me, and ride the balloon on the way up and on the way down, but open up this experience to more people. Some people will like to do it in the Virgin Galactic rocket way or Blue Origin rocket way, but I think there's some people out there, myself included, that really enjoyed a gentle, ascent into the stratosphere and could hang around a while. The way that Jane talks about it is, it would be nice to be able to enjoy the stratosphere, with a bathroom and full bar. And I think that's the way a lot of people are going to get the chance to see what I saw, and see the planet in a very unique and special way. So anyway, yeah, I'm excited about all the stratospheric work.
Oh, it would be a fascinating journey and one we look forward to. Alan Eustace, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Race to Near Space, wherever you get your podcast. And stay tuned for more dispatches from the stratosphere.